Today is all about contact cement and foam. I often glue like EVA foam floor mats together for costuming, and I just do it by feel. You know, sometimes I'll do 2 coats, sometimes I'll do 1 really heavy coat. Maybe I'll wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes I'll only wait 5 minutes where it's still a little wet, where I can have some room to move it, because if you wait till it's completely dry, you won't move it, assuming you have good coverage. I've also done craft foam, and that seems to absorb a little bit more of the foam, so I'll do, you know, maybe 2 coats, 1 light coat, 1 heavy coat, wait 15 minutes. And I just want to do some real world examples. What is the adherence when I do 1 coat both pieces for 5 minutes, for 15 minutes? What if I do 2 coats on both pieces for 5 minutes, 15 minutes? What if I just do 1 heavy coat and wait 15 minutes? You know, that's for EVA foam, that's for the craft foam. I'm just kind of wondering, am I applying too much? Am I doing it just right? I'm basically just gone by feel. Is that feeling correct? Could I get away with 1 heavy coat to save me some time from having to apply 2 coats? I'm kind of curious. So I've set up a bunch of foam here on my workbench, and I'm going to apply the contact cement and see how it goes. Now here is my contact cement. This is the old DAP Weldwood. I've got a bunch of different applicators. I have just a skewer to stir it, because when you open up the can, whether it's fresh, whether it's been sitting, you need to stir it, make sure you get a good mix of whatever, because things settle in solvents like this. I've got a couple of different just EVA foam applicators. You know, one is flat. I've got some thinner, smaller ones. I've got some with a point. I've got some that are triangular shaped. Just, you know, you've got different shapes, and sometimes you just need a different applicator, you know, big or smaller, to apply the contact cement. And all I've done, I cut a soft drink bottle in half, and I've taped it to my canister. And when I get a new canister, I just pull the tape off and retape the new one. This just holds all my stuff, make sure it's together where I don't have to cut new applicators. Yeah, it doesn't take long, but if I can save myself 10 seconds over the course of gluing something 30 times, well, that is a lot of seconds, and I'm trying to save every second I can, because I'm trying to get through stuff quickly. So I'm going to apply the contact cement to these pieces of foam. I'm going to show you my board of experiments, and we're going to see how it works. And maybe I discover that, hey, 1 coat is sufficient, and I've just been 2 coats, wasting material, wasting time. I don't need to. So here are my different applications. I'm going to do 1 coat, wait 5 minutes, 1 coat, wait 15, 2 coats, wait 5, wait 15. I'm going to do 1 heavy coat and wait 15 minutes. This is all EVA foam floor mats. It's what I typically use. Craft foam, it's a little bit thinner. Same method. 1 coat, wait 5 minutes, wait 15. 2 coats, wait 5 minutes, wait 15. And then 1 heavy coat, waiting 15 minutes. Always do a coat of contact cement on both pieces. That's how you get good adhesion. I'm going to try a coat just on 1 piece and see what happens. I'm trying to go wide here and look at all different situations. I'll do 1 coat, on just 1 piece for 15 minutes to see what happens. Let's apply some contact cement and start waiting. One note, I do wear an organic respirator when I apply contact cement, when I spray paint, when anything. I keep this in a sealed plastic bag, because these are carbon filters. They do absorb whatever's in the air, so if you don't keep it sealed, it's going to go bad quicker. I usually replace it every year, year and a half, but also I'm sure to always keep it in a bag, keep it solid. Safety is important. This stuff is strong stuff. You don't want to be breathing it in. You want a respirator, so wear one. Alright, so I'm currently waiting for my 5 minutes to be up for the first application. And my rule of thumb has always been, if it's not tacky, it's probably not ready. So that's 1 coat. There's no tack to that at all. So that's why I typically do 2 coats on EVA foam, because if it's not tacky, it's not going to stick. So while this is some real world result, I don't think it's quite going to do anything. Now this, where I did the heavy coat, I mean, that might work as that dries out, because there's more material. So, because how this works, you basically got this adhesive in a solvent. And so you apply it to the foam, the solvent flashes off, it evaporates, and it leaves just the adhesive. Well, it gets soaked up by this foam, so I mean this, you see a little bit of tack to that, that's because it's still wet. As it dries, it's going to have less tack. Like this being thicker, while it will evaporate and the solvent will flash, you still have more adhesive left. So that the 1 thick coat might work out fine. It's just a little harder to do a thick coat. It's easier to do a thinner coat. While it might stick a little bit after 5 minutes just because you have some thicker spots, because I mean these coats aren't perfectly even. You know, I don't think it's going to be the best bond. I mean this coat, that got a little thin. You can see, you know, it's just not much there. There's no tack. That's a little tacky, but that part is not tacky. Alright, 5 minutes is up. Let's try our first one. These were 2 just regular thin coats. That actually here better than I thought. There, yeah, can kind of pull it apart, but it's still pretty damp. So we're gonna let that sit. Usually when I stick it at 5 minutes, it's because it's a place where if I let it fully dry and it touches, once it's fully dry and it touches, you can't pull it apart. So when it's still a little wet, it gives you a little bit of working room. If it's a tight spot, it's something where you can't quite line it up that we want it to line up. Here is our craft foam, just 2 regular coats at 5 minutes. We'll stick those together. So you can see it's pulling apart a little bit. That's because the solvent hasn't completely flashed. But that's pretty good adhesive. That is better adhesive than I anticipated with just 5 minutes. And it does make me curious to maybe do some foam with just a very thin coat, because some of these it's thinner than others, and I didn't do a thin coat, so I'm going to also add that to the mix real quick. All right, it's time for some more. So this is 1 coat. I waited 15 minutes, so it is completely dry. It's got a little bit of tack in it, which is good. Push together firm. Pretty good bond. Maybe I could get away with 1 coat. I am going to check the thin coat. I think probably where my issue is when it's thin coats. Here was 2 coats. Waited 15 minutes. It's still a little wet. Firm push there. That does come apart pretty easily, but it's still really wet. So I'm going to just push that firm, let that sit a little bit, and let all these sit after I'm completely done to see, because when it's still wet, the point is it's wet, it can still move. So here was 1 heavy coat on each piece. I waited 15 minutes. It's still a little wet. The places that are dry, they have some tack to them. That's good. Push those firm together. And the places that are tacky, want to separate a little bit, not very much. That's a pretty good bond. All right, now we have 1 coat on just 1 piece, not both pieces. Waited 15 minutes for that. Stick that together. That is not a great bond at all. That pulled apart. It is a little bit of a bond, but it pulled apart way too easy. You can see that. And I didn't think that would work. You need it on both coats, but I was just curious to see what it is. It's a little bit of a bond. If you're in a tight spot, you potentially could get away with that, but it's gonna come apart. Now, if you maybe wanted to glue something together temporarily, and where for a reason you want to pull it apart after a little bit, that would be a great application for that. All right, on to my craft foam. 1 coat, 15 minutes. It's a pretty good bond. I kind of pulled it apart, but at the same time, I'm really just ripping the foam when I do that. Here is 2 coats, 5 minutes. It's a little wet. Most of it has dried up. This craft foam seems to soak up the contact cement a lot quicker. That's a good bond there. 1 heavy coat. I waited 15 minutes for it to dry. Looks like the contact cement is pretty well dry. Stick that together. That is a really nice bond there. 1 coat on only 1 side. I waited 15 minutes for it to dry. We'll stick that together. That pulls apart quite easily. Now I'm just waiting on 2 coats, wait 15 minutes, and then the very thin coat, waiting 15 minutes. And just looking at the thin coat, you touch that, there's hardly any stickiness. It's very little. I don't anticipate a good adhesion. The 2 coats, there's still a little bit of wet contact cement. Where there's not contact cement, there's a very good, tack when you touch it. Once it's all said and done and I've adhered everything, I'm going to kind of tug on the bonds because everything will have had at least 15 minutes to dry, which is generally the time. And we'll see what's a good bond, what is not a good bond, and how much force it takes to pry it apart. Early predictions, it seems like just doing 1 coat and is fine, even though it doesn't feel very tacky to my finger. It is a pretty good adhesion, so I'm a little bit surprised. I'm curious to see a thin coat. I think that might kind of bear out my kind of feel of I need 2 coats, because probably I've just gotten thin on a few coats in the past, and that's why I feel like I always need 2 coats. Maybe just 1 decent coat is enough. Now, if you're going to do thin coats, that would require maybe 2, but we'll see. We'll see if maybe this thin coat surprises me and does it here, but I don't think I'll be surprised. So, waiting for paint to dry. I'm waiting for contact cement to dry. We are on to the last bit. So, 2 coats on each side. I waited 15 minutes. This is what I usually do for all my applications. Great bond. But surprisingly, some of the other things I've done have had a good bond too. The 1 coat. So this was 2 thin coats. I waited 15 minutes. It is not tacky to, I mean, it's a little tacky to touch. This one does not feel tacky to touch. Let's see what happens. Firm push. I'm surprised. I mean, that's a good bond. Would I trust it? I think so. So I don't want to draw any conclusions too prematurely, but I think that my 2 coats I've been doing, I'm just wasting material and time. I think 1 coat and waiting 15 minutes seems like it's it. I mean, this was a thin coat, and I mean, I think I could rip that apart, and I'm going to try to rip everything apart in a minute. But that's a good bond. I mean, what I'm ripping up is just I'm separating the foam. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. All right, let's do the craft foam. This was 2 coats. I waited 15 minutes, and I always do 2 coats on craft foam because that just seems to soak up the contact cement way too easy. Certainly some tack between the pieces. Firm push. Great bond there. So thin coats on craft foam. And there's a little bit of tack on this craft foam, but craft foam just soaks up the contact cement. Will it work? It's a pretty good bond. So everything has been glued together. Now I'm going to see how much force it takes to pull it apart, and I think we can get a final determination on how much contact cement do you need to apply to foam to glue it. We're going to get the definitive answer, and I have a feeling that I might have been wrong all these years I've been doing this. Let's see. I'm going to reorient the camera so you can see what I'm doing, what I'm pulling apart. Let's check it out. All right, let's start. This was 1 coat. I waited 5 minutes. How easy is it to pull it apart? Came apart pretty easy. That's a little disappointing. Let's see. 1 coat, and we waited 15 minutes for it to dry. Yeah, that is not coming apart. That is just ripping the foam. This was just kind of a medium coat. Here's 2 coats. I waited 5 minutes. That came apart way too easy. Now that might just be that since they're pushed together, they need longer to dry. Maybe I'll make a note on that one, put a little star there to come back to it. Because, when you have it covered like that, it can't dry as easily because it doesn't have the air to circulate to help it evaporate. So I've done this before where you do it wet, where you're not sure it's going to dry, and I just let it sit longer. That might be it. 2 coats, 15 minutes to let dry. That is tearing the foam. Great bond. 1 heavy coat, waited 15 minutes. Wow, but you can see that's wet in there. So I think if you let that dry longer, that would probably be better. But what this is showing is that it is good to let it dry all the way if you can. Sometimes you cannot. Here's 1 coat just on 1 piece. Comes apart. That is no good. Here's 1 thin coat. I waited 15 minutes to let it dry. That is not as good of a bond. That came apart a little bit easier. It is tearing some foam. The 1 thin coat does not work. Now just the 1 regular coat, that worked really well. The big surprise is 1 coat waiting 15 minutes. I've always done 2 coats, and 1 medium coat is completely sufficient. I mean, that is just as strong as 2 coats waiting 15 minutes. Now the thin coat, that is some adhesion. It did tear some foam, but it came apart a lot easier. Let's go to our EVA foam. 1 coat, waited 5 minutes. Comes apart, and not super easy, but easier than I prefer. 1 coat, waiting 15 minutes. That's a pretty good bond. 2 coats, waiting 5 minutes. That is also a pretty good bond. 2 coats, waiting 15 minutes. That is also a good bond. 1 heavy coat, I waited 15 minutes. That just ripped it right off. That is a good bond too. 1 coat on just 1 side, waiting 15 minutes. Comes apart way too easily. That does not work. 1 thin coat on each side, waiting 15 minutes. That is a good bond. That's surprising. So I had some surprises here. I've always I try to wait 15 minutes, do 2 coats on a piece. And now on the foam formats, I may do 1 coat if it feels tacky. But really, even if it doesn't feel all that tacky to me, it still will adhere pretty good. So if you are into costume making like I am, you're applying contact cement to foam, building armor and different things. Well, if you do 1 medium coat on the foam on both pieces, let it wait 15 minutes and put it together, you're going to have a great bond. Now, the only time you might get into trouble is if you do a coat and you apply it wet And I think the answer to that is just give it longer to dry, because I've applied contact cement and I've done it wet, and I just give it longer to dry. Instead of waiting 15 minutes, I'll wait a couple hours, because I know that when you put it together, it can't flash as well. So here are the results. One coat waiting 5 minutes. It's not a bad bond. It's not a great bond. One coat waiting 15 minutes. Great bond. Two coats waiting 5 minutes. The problem is it just does not give enough time for the contact cement to dry. Two coats, 15 minutes, works great. One heavy coat. Well, the issue is even after 15 minutes, one heavy coat is still wet, so that needs more time to dry. One coat on just one piece, not on both pieces, doesn't work at all. One thin coat after 15 minutes, not a good bond. Now this is all EVA foam format stuff. Onto craft foam. One coat on both pieces after 5 minutes, not a good bond. One coat on both sides after 15 minutes, just one coat. It is not very good. It's not a terrible bond, but it's not very strong. Two coats after 5 minutes, solid bond. Two coats, both sides, after 15 minutes, still a solid bond. One heavy coat after 15 minutes, it was a solid bond. This craft foam, it soaks up the contact cement a little bit quicker, so it doesn't need the time to dry that the floor mats does. One coat on only one piece, not on both pieces, no, not a good bond at all. One thin coat after 15 minutes, not a good bond. I'd always put a thicker coat on EVA on the craft foam anyway, and this does prove the point that it does need a thicker coat. If you do the one heavy coat, you don't have to worry about letting it dry like you do with the EVA foam. Now the EVA foam, your best bet is to do one coat and wait 15 minutes. I've done it wet where there's a piece I'm just afraid that I can't get it in the right spot or I need a little bit of working room. The two coats is fine too, but the sweet spot is one medium, decent coat on both sides. Thin coats are not sufficient enough. And if you let it dry 15 minutes, you're all set. Now if you do it like a heavy coat, you're going to need to give more time to dry, even if you wait 15 minutes. If you do two coats after 5 minutes, you're going to give it more time to dry. So, the definitive answer is, for a floor mat, the thicker foam, one coat, let it wait 15 minutes, you're going to be fine. It's going to be good adhesion. For the EVA foam, you can do two coats after 5 minutes. You can do one heavy coat and wait 15 minutes. The definitive answer is, how much contact cement should you apply to foam if you're costume making or doing whatever with foam? One regular coat will be sufficient. My rule of thumb, my guy was always, does it feel tacky to the touch? And if it didn't, I would apply another coat. Well, even if it doesn't feel tacky, it still will work. The one I'm most surprised about is this craft foam. That always seemed to absorb more of the contact cement, and so I always did two coats on craft foam. We figured it out, and I'm surprised. I really thought two coats would be the way. So if you have an EVA foam project, here are your answers. Here's how much you need to use. This way you're not wasting your time, you're not wasting material, you're being very efficient. I'm always about efficiency. I don't want to waste material if I don't have to, because materials can get expensive.